91 people here. I think we should start. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Please feel free to put your names in the chat box and say hi, represent your city. It's allowed. You have a few minutes to do that while we welcome all the other people who are joining us this very moment. So my name is Victor Mark Onyegbu. I'm the head of grants and community building at Africa No Filter. And I would like to warmly welcome every one of you to this fireside chat put together under the auspices of the ANF Academy, Africa No Filter Academy, this very day. So thank you so much for joining us. We will be starting immediately. We have over 100 people in the room. Yay, that's a very good number. Okay, so to start, I will just take a few housekeeping and tell you a bit about what to expect today before I pass the floor to our very esteemed speaker, our very esteemed guest this afternoon. We'd like you to put your questions in the Q&A button. There's a Q&A box or button at the bottom of your screen. And you can put your questions there and not on the chat box. So I'll be looking at the Q&A to pick questions in the course of this session. So put your questions on the Q&A, but feel free to also chat. Feel free to say hello on the chat box. But your questions should be in the Q&A, and I'll be taking them when we get to that point. And yeah, I'll tell you a bit about Africa No Filter, and at some point we are going to take a quiz. At some point we'll open the questions. The questions will pop on your screen. A few questions that we need you to provide answers to, but I'll let you know when that happens or when that is required. Okay. So this is Victor saying hi from Lagos, and I'll tell you a bit about Africa No Filter before we start. Africa No Filter is a not-for-profit organization, as most of you are probably aware. I know many of you here would be regulars who have attended several of our sessions in the past, and so this is me introducing Africa No Filter to some of you who might be joining us for the first time. And it could also be a reminder or a refresher for those of you who have probably forgotten about us, right? So Africa No Filter is a not-for-profit. We work with storytellers on the continent. We've been shifting narratives about the continent and within the continent through empowering storytellers like yourselves to do the work that you do. And our mission is a mission that is all-encompassing. We shift narratives about the continent because it's an immediate need, it's an urgent need. We have an image crisis in Africa, we have a reputational crisis in Africa, and that's really what we're trying to address with the support that we give to storytellers. As we do this really by building a community and ensuring that we have a sustainable and a well-equipped and a strengthened storytelling ecosystem on the continent, because we believe by and large, when all is said and done, the community would remain and the community can sustain this mission going forward. And that's why we take a lot of time to invest in storytellers, invest in storytelling platforms. We invest in creatives, young people, middle-aged people, shifting narratives about the continent through the stories that they put out. And so all storytellers are welcome as long as you are passionate and demonstrate the need to shift narratives about Africa. We've been doing this for a couple of years and we've had amazing results thanks to all of you who have been on this journey with us. And so Africa No Filter has what we call the ANF Academy, and the ANF Academy is that platform through which we bring you face-to-face with skills, because we believe it's important to tell better stories about Africa, but it's also important to tell stories better. And that's what we try to do with Africa No Filter Academy. We bring you the skills and the tools that enables you to get more proficient in your storytelling, to expand your storytelling scope, and also to enhance the quality of your storytelling, because we believe that the more quality stories you put out there, better stories about Africa, but also quality and captivating stories about the continent, then the higher the tendency to get the attention that is required to shape narratives about the continent. So we're very happy to always bring to you the skills that you require to enhance the proficiency of your storytelling. And that's what we've been doing over the years with the ANF Academy. And so today we are centering our conversations on the photography industry. It's a very large industry, and we are very excited to be having a conversation to unravel, to unpack a lot about the photography industry, which is like a subset of the creative industry. And we're happy to have every one of you here. I myself am here to learn more because photography industry, I don't think there's so much known about the industry compared to some other artistic expressions or creative expressions. So we are here with an expert who can take us, right into that industry, unpack it, and let us know exactly what we need to know. For those of us who are within that space, who want to move to the next level, you want to monetize, you want to commercialize, you want to get more revenue, you want to literally just take your craft to the next level. That's why we have with us today a phenomenal guest, Yagazie Emezi. Yagazie Emezi is a woman of numerous accomplishments. I will do my best to give a very brief introduction of Yagazie. Yagazie is a Nigerian artist and a self-taught photojournalist focused on stories surrounding African women and their health, sexuality, education, and human rights. Having worked extensively across Africa, Yagazie also covers stories on identity and culture, social justice, climate change, and migration. Yagazie began her journey in 2015 and has since worked with Al-Jazeera, New York Times, Vogue, Newsweek, Inc. magazine, Time magazine, The Guardian, Washington Post, National Geographic, Bloomberg Newsweek, Businessweek, The Weather Channel, New York Times Magazine, and several not-for-profit organizations. Yagazie is a recipient of the 2018 inaugural Creative Bursary Award from Getty Images, a participant for the 2018 New York Portfolio Review. She has also been featured by British Journal of Photography, Huffington Post, ID, Neiman Reports, Paper Magazine, Vogue, CNN, and the Washington Post. Yagazie is based between Nigeria and the United States, and she has numerous publications to her credit. I've done my best to give you the most abridged version of her very, very lengthy introduction and profile. But ladies and gentlemen, I'll cede the floor very shortly to Yagazie, and please ensure that you have your questions, like I mentioned earlier, in the chat, in the Q&A button, and feel free to keep chatting in the chat box. But the very next voice you will hear is that of Yagazie Emezi. Yagazie, you have the floor now. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Victor. I really appreciate that introduction. I feel as if I don't know where to start off now with covering my introduction since you've said most of it. Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to see so many names from around the continent, looks like it. Before we jump right into it, because I can't see it on my end, I just want to confirm that if anybody needs captioning, if they are able to see the captions up. If you can please just confirm that in the chat before I jump right into everything. Anybody in need of captions, can you please confirm that you are seeing the captions? Yes, we're seeing captions? Okay, fantastic. All right, so I will jump right into it and try and give a general background into my journey to photojournalism. And I would start off by telling what I tell everybody, which is I come from a family of storytellers. So I grew up in Aba, Abia State in Nigeria, and my father was a storyteller. My mother was a storyteller in many ways with all her travels and whatnot. My sibling was a writer. My brother liked to tell tall tales. And we grew up with just this sort of like cross-cultural knowledge with books and pictures. And as I had an interest in history, and from my interest in history, I got very interested in African history in general. So I decided to go to university for cultural anthropology, to study cultural anthropology with a focus on African studies, specifically to study cultism in Nigerian universities and the government links to that. Obviously, I didn't end up doing that because there are certain dangers in that sort of work. Sorry, I'm just checking my notes to make sure. It's very odd not seeing faces to talk to. I'm only seeing my own face. So after university, I decided to come back to Nigeria just because the United States was a very difficult place for me to assimilate into. And it was in Nigeria that I would say that I became interested in photography with absolutely no background in photography whatsoever. I was just excited to be in Lagos for the first time because I'm not from that city. And I found myself drawn to people and just visuals that reminded me of home. So I started taking pictures on my phone. I had a BlackBerry passport at that time. And sorry, can I actually request Victor for you to come on camera so that it will look like I'm talking to someone? Just to keep me a bit on track, I would appreciate it. Sorry, Victor. Let's see. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you. So initially, I started taking photographs on my phone. And back in the day, I think this was about 2014, social media was still kicking off at its very height, sharing a lot of my images online and really just photographing what I thought was appealing. Now, at that time in Lagos, I had no clue what I wanted to do. And part of this session is to be completely transparent with you all in terms of not only the successes, but also the challenges that I went through to get to where I am right now. At the time, I was living in different spaces for about 2 years when I had no other option in terms of, do I find a job or do I go back to my village or something? And it was at the moment someone introduced me to the founder of Lagos Fashion Week and recommended that I photograph backstage of the Fashion Week, which she permitted me to. And from there, I started getting jobs from different luxury fashion stores in Lagos to do product photography for them. So initially, my introduction to photography was through fashion, but I didn't really enjoy that because there didn't seem to be at the time for me a soul or a story in the photographs that I was taking. So I initially just started off taking the pictures that I wanted, which included working with other photographers, saying, can I tag along with you on this particular job? Do you need a second shooter? And, taking my own images and essentially building my own portfolio over time. And because of that, a lot of this was by chance, a friend sent me a link to apply as a staff photographer for a nonprofit in Liberia. I said it's either an option of emptying my bank account for another rent year in Lagos, or I apply for this job. I applied for the job, got the job, and within 2 weeks, I moved to Liberia. And Liberia was really the place that gave me a stronger foundation to practice my photography, because Lagos at the time, as someone who was interested in photography, it was already an oversaturated place in terms of visual creators. I didn't know who to approach. I didn't know how to get a foot in. But Liberia, it's being a much smaller place and working with a nonprofit, I ended up having what a lot of photographers and journalists crave for, which is access. I was working with a nonprofit that had access into certain opportunities, into certain communities, that had relationships with certain people. And because of their own standing within those communities, I was easily able to, take pictures of people, follow up on my own personal stories, and from there essentially build a broader portfolio. There in Liberia, I met a photographer who kindly introduced me to an editor at New York Times. And that was in the year 2017. And that is when I got my first New York Times story. And I would like to say that, the rest is history. The rest of it, ended up just coming back and forth. So I would say in this journey, when I started off and I was taking assignments back and forth, it was all a learn as you go experience, because I was not formally educated in the world of photojournalism. But what really, really helped was I knew a lot of up and coming photographers like myself who were trying to figure it out. And throughout this talk, I'll just be giving you little tips of things that helped me along the way, which was one indispensable aspect that has helped me with my career was reaching out to people that I saw as my colleagues, because we were all struggling in the same game. We were still coming up at the same time. So it was really a matter of calling a friend and saying, I don't know what this button on my camera does. What can you teach me really quick? I have this job tomorrow. And really just, even though we were in different countries, but really depending on other photographers like myself. And we built this community where we were able to grow and learn together. So I would say, please do not hesitate to reach out to photographers, not just the established photographers, but also the ones that you see in your town, in neighboring countries. Reach out to them, ask questions, especially when I started getting jobs and I wasn't too sure of the day rates that were being offered. It's always good to reach out to someone and say, this is the day rate that so-and-so publication offered me. Does it sound right? And later on, we'll go into, actually, let's just jump right into it. We can jump really quickly before I show you some of the work that I've done. We can jump into just how to manage the money aspect of it. So a lot of the times when I got these opportunities, I didn't know industry rates whatsoever. So I would ask a friend saying, oh, how much should I get paid for this job? He would tell me, I usually get paid maybe 300, 350. And I would say, great. And I'll go to the client and say my day rate is 500. And they would accept it. So please don't be shy to negotiate up all the time. Even if you know that the day rate is maybe a standard 500, I always, if they don't initially offer a fee right off the bat, I give them a higher rate. And sometimes they might come down just a little bit above the regular day rates. I really want to jump into my general approach with photography and some of the stories that I work on. Hold on, I'm just seeing, can everybody hear me okay? I see someone mentioned there's a bit of background noise. Are we all hearing me fine? Not too much static and such, I hope?
I can hear you fine from here.
Okay, all right, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to jump into some of the features that I've worked on. Like Victor mentioned, I've worked with a variety of publications, but the one that stands out most in my mind is not even my first assignment with New York Times, but it was my first assignment with National Geographic magazine, because I think, a lot of us grew up with that name. A lot of us grew up with at least having some sort of access or visibility to the actual print at that time. And we just sort of like see it as this thing to aspire to, even though I think we all have various goals and ambitions outside of that as well. But at the time when I got the opportunity, and I'm just going to jump right into sharing my screen, I wasn't too sure as to where to start. So I tried doing a little bit of research in terms of what sort of photographers have worked in Africa, predominantly what sorts of African photographers have worked in Africa with National Geographic, only to disappointedly find out that there were none. And I was the first Black woman photographer that they had hired in their 100+ years. And I was going in blind on this story. So I will jump into sharing the screen right here. Where is my, where did it go? There we go. All right. So my first story with National Geographic and how they work is, for some publications, you are paired up with a journalist to work on a story. But with National Geographic being very visual lead-in, it is up to the photographer to build a story. So I was approached by a photo editor to work on a story around equality and Rwanda's progress when it comes to women's rights in the country. And what does that look like? So my job in this sense is to develop a story on my own. We are given a budget to work with a researcher. So we're given research days to do our own investigations onto what this might look like. So I was able to hire a researcher. I mean, you can be your own researcher if if you're that thorough, but I generally prefer to work with journalists who are experienced in that topic in order to do a more thorough job on the story. So in this case, and I'll start scrolling, my job was to basically represent what women's equality looks like in all levels, from bottom up, everyday aspects of life. So after doing research for about 2 weeks in advance, at the time, I think I was actually on a ship off the coast of Liberia, with very little internet access. So I had to use their satellite devices on the ship to get Wi-Fi at the point, and try and establish like connections with people in the city to tell them the sort of story that I was working on. It was initially meant to be a 10-day assignment, and it ended up being a 1-month assignment because of the cultural barriers in Rwanda. Given its rather sensitive history, you will find people that are a bit closed off to sharing with media, very understandably so, if you understand the history of Rwanda and how media was used. But after a month, these are the images that I came up with. And once again, my job was to give a well-rounded representation of different demographics of women in Rwanda. So I started off in the rural setting, where I met with coffee harvesters, because back in the day, only men were allowed to plant and harvest coffee. So I had a representation of that. And of course, if you have access to planting your own crops, selling your own crops, you give women a certain level of independence and self-ownership. So little examples like that. They had their first woman motorcycle rider, and we shared her story as far as how her riding colleagues were supportive of her. So whenever I'm photographing someone, it's very important to obviously just work on their individual story, even if they're a wider part of a bigger story. It's to harp in on that individual story and collect as much information as possible. Your editor will be the one to decide what stays and what goes, not you. So just collect as much as possible. Fun fact with National Geographic is that we have to turn in every single image created. So if you're not allowed to delete anything, every single thing on your memory card must be put on a hard drive and shipped over to their headquarters, which includes the blurry, the out of focus, all your embarrassing shots must be included. So sometimes an editor might receive a file between 4,000 to 16,000 images to go through, depending on the story. This image here is an image of Alice, who was one of the lawyers responsible for making sure that rape was recognized as a weapon of war during the genocide, which led to a conviction of a lot of war criminals. We have the first woman pilot. We have one of the first ministers, and then back to the rural setting where women are taught vocations. We have the first all women rangers off in the safari for you to travel to. So this story was particularly important to me, mainly because there was a lot of pressure as the first Black African woman to be hired to do well. I remember I submitted the work, and I think I cried for like 2 days after because I was so stressed about, not having done a good job or anything like that. But I got a decent, spread and in the magazine and really good feedback. But even though I wasn't able to reach out to any, photographer like me that was familiar with working with National Geographic, I still had a lot of support from my editor herself. I still had a lot of support from my photography friends. One of the things that really keeps me, or so far has kept me going in this industry, is what I always tell people is I do not wait to get paid to tell a story. So back when I was full of vim and vigor, I'm a little bit tired these days, I would always go out on my own, and the stories that I wanted to work on, I would just go out and photograph it. And this is the reason why I was given a lot of opportunities starting out. Was I already had a large body of work of, stories that I had created independently. And more importantly, I also built a website. So if you do not have a website, I highly, highly encourage you to get a website. It doesn't have to be your own name.com, but just some sort of visual representation of your work. Social media does play an important role as far as getting jobs, but photo editors will go, and other sort of clients will go to your website to get a deeper look at your work and a proper view of the images. So please put that as a priority, and also try to keep your website as simple as possible, because editors are they edit. So they tend to go through things very fast. And if they get on a page and you have like 600 tabs for them to click and all this other stuff, it might be a little bit challenging. So also try and keep your website as minimal as possible and keep your stories at the forefront. Let the images speak for you. An example of working on stories on my own that can lead to larger opportunities was covering the NSAS protests in Lagos in 2020. Now, at this point, obviously, the protests were kicking off, and my first instinct was like, oh, as a photojournalist, I need to take this opportunity to go and document, never know what may come out of it. I joined the protest. Well, I entered the protest. I wouldn't say I joined it at that time. But then to see people that I knew, to see people that I easily recognize, matching and chanting and sharing their stories, it was hard for me to actually be present as a witness or as a photojournalist. So I actually just ended up participating as a protester, because you can't see your neighbors fighting for something, and you're just there to basically maximize on your own opportunity of of whatever events that might be happening. So for, I think, about a week or a little bit over 2 weeks, I followed along with all the protests, and we went to different places in Lagos for the gatherings, and I really just documented what I saw. Little demonstrations, little cultural moments as well. For example, this guy taking a selfie with the protests going on in the background, women being at the forefront, youth being at the forefront, expressions of frustration to get to the sentiment of, the protest, community support as well, defiance, leadership. And these were all things that I had witnessed at the protest that I really wanted to embody. And unfortunately, we didn't know that the protests would end the way it tragically did. But a lot of these images serve as an archive to a very remarkable time in Nigeria for especially Nigerian youths. And I remember after the protests and after the shootings of October 2020, I just put all the images in a hard drive and packed it away, because I didn't enjoy looking at the images given the situation. And it was very difficult for me to come to terms with the fact that they were most likely people that I had photographed that are probably missing and not been found. And so it was there. Even now, I get goosebumps thinking about it. But then about almost a year ago, in 2022, the Museum of Modern Arts in New York reached out to me, the curator, Oluremi, and she asked if I could participate in a group exhibition focused on Nigeria in New York. And I was able to essentially showcase this work to a larger audience to give them a broader perspective of what had happened in Nigeria. And at the time of participating in this protest, I never would have thought that, taking these sort of images would give me an opportunity like that. So once again, please let your passion for stories lead everything first. Do not let the hunger and the ambition for publications and print, make you selective. Do not focus on stories that you think would get certain publications, attention and whatnot. Really focus on the stories that you are passionate about, because strategically speaking as well, that's what people are looking for. They're looking for sincerity in images and not sort of things that, you're either tired to do or you feel forced to do. So please bear that in mind. Let the passion speak first. If you have any free time, please do your own stories. Don't wait for someone to accept your pitch in order to get a story done. So that's a bit around just focusing on independent work. And, I always say, do the work first and the rest will follow. Over here we have, and please take your own time later on to go to my website because it's quite chunky. I have a list of work that I have done with New York Times over the years. And with this, I won't necessarily focus on the story, but just share with you a bit of why I think I was able to stay consistent with New York Times since 2017, which was, I was fast. Very, very fast. So in terms of if an editor reached out to me, I would reply immediately. When it was time to submit images, I would file the images way before the deadline date. So I became someone that people would deem reliable. Now, to be transparent with you, privilege did work for me in an advantage because I am a dual citizen. So I was able to travel to other countries without the pause of, visa applications and whatnot. So I want to be transparent with you that in some aspects of my career, privilege has played a part. But I also have friends that do not have access to that sort of travel, but still keep with just being sharp and being fast with their assignments and their delivery and their responses. Which editors like in general, and asking questions and asking for feedback. So whenever I sent images to an editor, I would instantly say, please let me know your thoughts on this, what you think I can improve on, all of that. So these are some of the stories that I've worked on with New York Times over the years, predominantly in West Africa though. So there's that. And then I'm going to focus on back again on independent work and sometimes just making necessary sacrifices. So a few years ago, I think, yes, in 2018, I was approached by this nonprofit called Sea Shepherd to follow them on the high seas and document their strategies in preventing illegal fishing activities, essentially poaching. They didn't offer any pay. They just offered to cover your flight and that's it. And I worked with them for about a year, which was essentially going on a ship with them for weeks and following their patrols and their actions. Now, I used this on my own time. I didn't have money, but I knew that this would be a very valuable input to my portfolio and the sort of, work or stories that people might be interested in. So I would also advise photographers that sometimes not getting paid for a story, but also make sure you're not getting taken advantage of, is to an advantage if, once again, you're passionate about the story, if the story is important. This particular body of work laid in wait on this website, just like this, for a number of years. So this was from 2019 till now, and I recently got nominated for this body of work for a very prestigious award. So once again, do the work first, the rest will follow. I think that we are in a world in need for instant gratification, but also in reality, we are in need to survive. So it is about keeping a fine balance between the two. making sure that you're able to feed yourself is important, but also making sure that you are doing the right sorts of stories to further your career, even if the profit is not immediate. So that's some images from the work. I did this with them through Liberia, Gabon, and Namibia. I don't know how to swim. I don't do what I did. I did not tell them. I told one person on the ship that I didn't know how to swim, just as far as security goes. But I really wanted to do this job because also it seemed like just such a remarkable adventure to have. And I really enjoyed the sort of grittiness and hardship and, waking up in the middle of the night and climbing up a ship and like going with, the Marine guards. And it was a very exciting time. My knees can't tolerate that sort of activity anymore. But I would highly recommend taking on opportunities and also pitching yourself for opportunities. So if you see something online or if you hear someone talking about something, even if they haven't mentioned photography, sometimes I would say, oh, that sounds fascinating. I would love to be able to photograph that. I heard that they're talking about, doing gold mining somewhere in Nigeria. I'll say, oh, I've never heard of that. Can I tag along and take pictures? Is that possible? And sometimes I have to invest a little bit of my own money. What I will say is the life of a freelancer is not easy. I did spend, once again, a little bit over 2 years depending on other people for beds, for couches, until I got the staff position in Liberia. And with that, I was able to save a little bit of money. And let's say, for example, that I've saved about, $1,500. And this is what I'm about to say is going to give you an example of how to move quickly. And an editor reaches out to you and says, hey, are you available to travel to the States? Or whatever the case may be. There are some people who unfortunately and realistically may have to like request, hey, can you book the plane ticket for me and that sort of thing. But in my case, if you do have a little bit of savings, just know that the money will come back because they are obligated by contract to pay you. And I would just tell them right away that I can book the tickets tonight if need be. They don't have to, go through their own levels of bureaucracy to get a ticket booked. So I would just advise that if you have a little bit of savings and you come across a work opportunity, do not be afraid to spend your money first because you will get reimbursed and you will get your paycheck at the end of the day. Let's see. Okay. And last work I'm going to show you is also independent work. And I would also say right now I am a practicing visual artist, and this is really about knowing how to branch out in photography. I would say one of my advantages to the longevity that I've had in a very, very difficult and challenging industry is not just sticking to one thing. I have many passions. At the end of the day, I am a storyteller, and there are many ways to tell a story and discuss certain topics. So this sort of work is something that I did actually in my own time. I had a week off between assignments, and I had an idea and I wanted to, photograph it, which I did. And then what I realized is that over the years, as I create all these, images for these publications, it's the news cycle. Your image gets published one day. The next day, there's something else on the front page. There's another article, there's another image. But I realized that the work that I created for myself individually was the work that was requested in galleries, in museums. Example with the one with the NSAS protest as well. So I would say also focus on the ideas and topics that you care about, because that can actually take you further than just working for an agency or trying to maintain longevity with a certain publication. Please try and branch out. I know we all have, exciting ideas in our heads. Find ways to, execute it and carry it out, because that has just really helped me. I've seen a lot of photographers who, they were 20 years in the game ahead of me, and they are currently struggling right now because they never once thought to diversify their stories. They always thought that, hey, I'm always going to photograph wolves. you know, and at a certain point, you know, I was saying I'm always going to photograph women, but then it's no, I'm also going to photograph our climate crisis and aspects of culture. Thankfully, I'm interested in these things, but it's really, really important to keep your interest in this sort of field very broad and wide. And also, I would like to quickly talk about how are we on time? Because I know I would want to take questions. Are we good on time?
Yes, we're still good on time, Yagazie.
Okay.
Perhaps
Okay.
just a few more minutes and then we
Okay,
can
great.
take questions.
I think the last sort of like advice, let me actually stop the share here. The last bit of advice I would give is utilize what we have today, which is social media. Now, social media just has changed in many ways. Once again, I came in at a time where images on a platform like Instagram of regular scenes in around African countries was not a norm. We still had a lot of the stereotypical images, and I was sharing a lot of that, and that's what also helped me with building visibility, because a lot of people were not seeing those images. But please maximize on social media. I know a lot of people struggle with posting regularly on social media or worrying about, you know, having certain anxieties, very valid, about what people's perceptions may be. But please bear in mind that this is your life. This is your paycheck, potential paycheck, you know. So put your work out there, put yourself out there, put your voice out there, because I went through a stage of this sort of almost purist approach of photography that I witnessed mainly from Western photographers, which is the photo should always tell the story. No one needs to see the photographer. But I was posting, you know, pictures of my own life on social media and then pictures of my work. And at a certain point, I got worried about, you know, the respectability politics of, are people going to take me seriously because I'm sharing these other aspects of my life? And turns out me doing that, especially during post-COVID years, really actually saved me financially a lot of times, because media is changing, news is changing. You look at platforms like TikTok and Instagram, they're gravitating towards videos as well. You need to diversify. And I got a lot of opportunities because editors were reaching out to me asking if I could do video work for them because they had seen me posting myself already on social media. I had gotten criticized about posting myself years ago, but at the end of the day, all that criticism was what benefited me, where someone said, hey, can we feature you in a video? Last year, I did two, you know, wonderful collaborations. One was with National Geographic and DHL, where I traveled to the Republic of Congo and, you know, photographed the sappers, you know, the dapper women in Brazzaville. And that was because they had seen me doing my goofy dances on TikTok and talking about my work. And they were just like, she will be good for this, you know, because she's already comfortable in front of the camera. And that was a significant paycheck. I think 2022 was, I had 2 big jobs and that was it for me that year. You know, so I would definitely say, please put yourself out there. Use social media to the best of your ability. Do not worry about respectability, politics. I mean, obviously within reason, people, but, you know, just try and find a balance between not only representing your work, but also representing yourself, because people want to see that. A lot of young editors are also on social media, and they want to see and understand who they will be working with. If you seem like, honestly, if you seem like you have a good vibe, they want to see that. So share personal stories if you feel comfortable. Put out your work even if you didn't get paid for it. And honestly, just keep being consistent. Once again, I didn't get anything for over 2 years. You know, while I was doing my own work, I was, you know, weighing between, do I spend my money on food or do I spend my money on public transportation? Which is it, you know? But at the end of the day, I really do believe that in this sort of industry, consistency always pays off. And yeah, I am here to take your questions so that we can do some more talking.
I wish I could give you a resounding round of applause from here, but I actually came into this knowing that you were going to blow us away, and you've done just that. So thank you so much. What an amazing, inspirational story extremely motivated right now. I've learned a lot, and I'll be taking a couple of questions. But before then, I've had my colleagues post a few questions. We would like you to take a couple of seconds to just respond to. I think those questions should be on your screen right now. And so please, they're just 3 or 4 questions we want you to respond to in the next couple of minutes while I look through the chats and the Q&A box to pick up the questions that we will engage Yagazie with for the next few minutes. Thank you. Okay, I believe we should be getting done with this now. Which of the following best describes you? The second question is, what's your biggest challenge? What do you want to gain from this fireside chat? The results of these questions will come up and it will feed into our conversation with Yagazie. We want to use this to get to know how to profile our audience better and what we can improve upon in subsequent editions of the ANF Academy. And so please put your honest responses to these questions. And I think we should be done in the next couple of seconds. Yagazie, I learned a lot from what you said. And I mean, I was just writing down a few things. I noted pace, speed. I mean, these are just single words I pulled out of my understanding of all the things you said. You were talking about speed, you talked about your pace, you talked about integrity, and that's a very key ingredient that we find lacking in amongst creatives these days, because it's just there's this rush to commercialize. There's this rush to move on to the next big thing, right? And people do not really spend time fulfilling their obligations to the highest possible quality when you have clients who have commissioned you to do work. And, you know, we don't see the level of diligence that we used to see, or the level of diligence that can open doors for you continuously. So I think I was really struck by how you talked about integrity and how you talked about the pace with which you respond to requests and all those types of things. And I think these are very important nuggets that our creatives need to have in their back pocket all the time. You talked about organization. You talked about your curiosity and your passion. You talked about risk-taking, flexibility, consistency. I mean, there was just a lot. But I want us to start with a few things to sort of unpack that industry, because like you said, the photography industry is a very complex one. You have a lot of people, creatives, very talented, but they are also struggling. And you have the ones who have done very, very well as well. So sometimes when I look at the industry, it feels to me like you either have the struggling creatives or you have the very successful ones. And there's almost no middle ground. There's almost no middle class, so to say. So how do you see the industry, and why do you think that that is sometimes the case, where you do not have, you know, this middle ground or middle group of people? You either have a very successful Yagazie, or you have the very struggling Mr. or Mrs. X. Why do you think that's the case?
I think it's about privilege and access. Compared to some of my peers, right, and I always consider myself an international photographer, even though I have been limited to Africa, because no one is flying African photographers outside, but they are flying plenty of Western photographers inside, even though we do the same stories, you know, and we have the same years of experience. But I would say definitely privilege and access plays a huge role. Privilege in the sense of, to be quite transparent, the majority of very successful photographers I know either live in the States. And when I say photographers, is no offense to those who might be interested in it, looking outside of, you know, wedding photography and people building really, really strong, successful careers of that and starting other sorts of businesses from that. But just in the world that I'm familiar with, which is photojournalism and a little bit of commercial photography, is that the majority of them already come from wealthy families and or married rich. or when it comes to access, or they live in a place where they're able to regularly meet with editors. You know,
Yeah.
the editors invite them to their barbecues and stuff like that, and you hang
Yeah.
out and you're able to like physically network with people. Part of the request from this, presentation was to talk about networking. And in my professional career, I haven't done a lot of networking with like the main to-dos that would be responsible for advancing my career. Because a lot of it I noticed is done in person, which is why people have conferences or they have, what's the
Mm.
word, the portfolio reviews where they fly people out. That's the opportunity. But how often is that opportunity presented to African, photographers? So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
I see myself, definitely within a level of success, but not the same success as my Western peers. Even
Yeah.
though there are definitely some that are struggling. My privilege has been having, dual citizenship, which has been able to allow me to get a few more jobs, i.e.,
Mhm.
in East Africa. But outside of that, that's it.
Yeah.
This year, for
Yeah.
example, was the slowest year ever because somehow the industry went back to parachuting in a lot of Western photographers. We are all here on ground, but there's still a
Yeah.
preference. And that preference is based off the editors personally knowing someone better because they've had
Yeah.
coffee with them, they've invited them to their home. So
Yeah.
there is that disparity. Yeah.
I mean, it's a bit of a challenge. Thinking about this, it's something we see across several creative expressions, not just in photography, where you have
Yeah.
abundant talents on the continent, but you see, even in the media space, we see a
Mm,
lot of reliance on the Western journalists and the Western media platforms and news outfits compared to the kind of opportunities that we have for their African counterparts. And it's really a challenge, and I think what you've done is quite motivational. I, I guess a lot of people would want to know how you broke into National Geographic because I think they're
okay.
one of the largest funders of storytellers
Mhm.
and those in the photography industry. Tell us a
Yeah.
bit about how that played out. Like what led you to them and how have you sustained that relationship?
Okay, so it was an interesting thing. After working, I'll make it a short story. After working in Liberia, I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to move back to Lagos because I wasn't ready to lose all my savings in rent. And so I knew someone that was like a travel YouTube producer, one of those people that's like, how to live in this country for $500 a month, that sort of thing. So essentially, I was hired by him to go to Bali and be photographing their YouTube, whatever thing. So I was in Bali for 4 months. But during that time, I was interested in my own story and I met someone who said that he was going to a traditional funeral. So I said, me too, I want to come, just because it sounds fascinating and I want to know what a traditional funeral looks like in Bali because, it involves cremation, it involves certain ceremonies. I went there, created my, images and posted them on social media. And then a Nat Geo editor reached out to me and asked if I had more images at the time or if I was going to go back. Unfortunately, it was a one-time thing. I told the editor no, but then that sort of just already like opened a small door where I would like to believe that maybe the editor introduced my work to another editor. And then for this particular National Geographic story, I was approached by an editor who asked me whether I would be interested in working in that particular story. But also the reason why I was approached was because of my already existing portfolio. They could see
Yeah.
that I had a large body of work that focused on women and young girls. So in terms of who's going to do a story really well, if not an African woman who's already familiar with working with other African women. They weren't going to hire like a Western, French man or something like that to come in
Yeah.
because they want to get a good story. And one thing that I'll give, National Geographic credit for is that they're actually very, very, very thorough with that. So I would say it was the same routine in terms of consistency and creating my
Yeah.
own story. And
Hmm.
I know this for a fact because I have slowed down a bit in terms of creating my own stories. and the job offers just went down like this.
Wow. So there's a correlation
There's
between,
definitely a correlation because I'm
yeah,
tired, man. And now like I work longer, my body's paining me. Sometimes I come home and I'm like, I don't want to be running outside for 1 week before another story. I want to actually
yeah,
enjoy my apartment and look at my plants. So there is definitely a correlation with that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it was based off really, I would like to say consistency and just putting my work out there.
Great. I mean, thanks for that. We have a few more questions, but before I go to the chats, sorry, to the pick up some questions from the Q&A, I also wanted to touch on something that you might have slightly touched on when you were talking initially with your pictures. You talked about some of these platforms that require you to send all your images, right? And it just struck something in my head, IP. And I know a lot of people have been struggling with that question. How do you handle, ownership of IP, especially for those who are emerging, those who are still at the point where they have the privilege of negotiating from a very strong footing and they sometimes are holding the shorter end of the stick? The emerging photographers, how do you think they should approach this question of IP dealing with big platforms?
Yeah, I think, it's business, honestly. Like when I first work with a client, I try to be as easygoing as possible because I'm trying to build a relationship here. I'll be quite honest. When I started, I didn't have the sort of clientele that I had now. So a lot of the times, like even if I'm taking the chance, like I said, I always like to jump first before they do. So if they send me an email, offering me a story and there's no amount of money mentioned, then I will tell them my day rates and go up a bit higher. And then they'll come down because they already say, if she's saying her day rate is 600, we can't tell her 300. So maybe we'll do, 400 or 450. And I'm just like, when I'm starting out, I'm like, oh, that's good. I want to show them also that, I'm easy in terms of being reasonable and whatnot. So there's a little bit of push and pull. Quite honestly, you're not always going to get your way, especially when you're starting out. So I would say when starting out, do try and be as reasonable as possible. Like, don't obviously allow people to step on your throat. If they say $200 a day, that's insane. Unless they want you to work for 4 hours only, then fine. Like, you have these sorts of assignments. But sorry, what was the other question? IP.
Yes, the ownership of the intellectual property for emerging upcoming.
So with a lot of these bigger institutions like New York Times, National Geographic, honestly, the way I see it is that they all are already like deeply set in stone as an institution. Like in order to even request like an on paper change, like you have to go through so many bureaucracies and whatnot. So it's a little bit difficult with actual institutions. When they come with you with a day rate, it's usually that exact day rate that they're paying everybody around the world. So it's really hard to negotiate with them in that case. My most successful negotiations have come with nonprofits. Where there's a little bit of wiggle room, not so much the news publications. I would say if a publication reaches out to you for the first time, just double check to be sure, because sometimes they might try and lowball you because, oh, you're on the continent or something, but just double check. But that's actually very, very rare from reputable news publications. A lot of them offer shared copyrights. Which is a good thing, especially from these funds, which essentially means that they get rights to your work, you also get the same rights, essentially. And a lot of the times, they're not doing anything besides publishing it for that story. That's it, and a lot of the times with certain stories, if I want to, before I put up a fight, and usually in this case, it's with nonprofits, because these institutions, I'm sorry, but if they're set in stone, it's like, why should we be paying you $700 when every other photographer around the world is getting paid 500? Then you get it's a little, then they'll be like, let's not work with this person. And side note, some of these publications actually have their own unions. So National Geographic has the Society of Photographers who review contracts and stuff like that. New York Times, they have their unions, so there are people who have already thought about these things and have put up a fight on behalf of other, journalists and photographers, thankfully. So with those institutions, I would say it's a losing battle if you're trying to have them pay for, full copyrights or whatever the case may be. Those that are National Geographic does shared copyright as well. And honestly, a lot of the assignments are good. You're getting paid a little bit over $500 a day outside of post-production rates. So if you're on assignment for 1 week, 2 weeks, and sometimes in my case, 1 month, I'm just like, am I really going to push for extra when they're very likely not going to use that work outside of the publication, and I can use the work in whatever way that I want, so it's technically still a win-win situation. For nonprofits, I tend to do my research on the nonprofits because I think that they have a lot more money. So there have been situations where I push back and say, like, if you're looking to use this image usually they have a timeline, they want it in full perpetuity and whatnot. I push back and say, no, you have to pay, my day rate is separate from my copyright, fee, or my licensing fee, or whatever the case may be. And honestly, guys, it's hit or miss sometimes. There have been times when people have just been like flat out no that they can't, but they can offer like $1,000 more, and I'm like, sure. There are other times where one was just like, I gave them a budget where it was like my day rate, and then the copyright fee was like $7,000, and they were like, okay.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, shit, I should have charged more. These people have money. So with nonprofits, also do your research, especially with the nonprofits that you haven't heard of before. Save the Children, Gates Foundation, they're problematic here.
What of African No Filter?
I don't know. But some of them, like, do your research and see what sort of work that they're doing. Some of them have big backers, but like nonprofits like Save the Children, they're pretty institutionalized, and if you can see that they do very good work, it's just like, that's where I say passion comes in. I'm like, once again, we have to keep a fine balance. There are some stories that I won't like push back on because the story is really important, and I can see that the nonprofit in this case is doing good work. So I would say, in summary, push back more with nonprofits than with the larger corporations, because that's what they are. Always double check though. Even if they're large corporations, always double check with other photographers what you've heard the standard day rate is.
Thank you so much. I mean, this is really helpful. And I do tell people, I do tell creatives, if your commissioning organization is requesting for shared IP for non-commercial users, then I think I would, if I were in that position, I would want to be a bit more flexible in my negotiation with them, as opposed to big corporates who might want to use it for commercial purposes. And so I think there is need for creatives to demand full transparency to know what those uses would be.
And definitely, even from these corporations, read the contracts. There's nothing better I like than reading contracts. Do not do any job with any client without a contract. Read that contract. Sometimes they do try and sneak in the full copyrights and whatever the case may be. And even to the point where they're saying you can't even use the images on your website, for your portfolio. Read everything and make sure that what they're requesting is in line with the story that they want you to work on. With nonprofits, the reason why a lot of them ask for full copyright is mainly because they're trying to protect their beneficiaries, because they don't trust you in terms of how you will use the images for profit or whatever the case may be. These are like protected children or women. So a lot of the times they ask for that. And for me, just where I'm from, like just because of my history now, is I'm able to push back on them with that, where it's just like, I have a track record of working with nonprofits. So if you either allow me to use this on my portfolio or you pay me. I already have a track record that's proven that I do not use my images for anything, shady or anything like that, especially when it comes to the vulnerable.
Wow, this is helpful. Thank you so much, Yagazie. We have the Q&A box buzzing with lots and lots of questions. I'll do my best to run through. But if you can just give us very brief responses to them,
Okay.
then we can take as many as possible as the time permits. Someone is asking a question about Bob Etemiko. I want to try Gear 360 photography. Would you also recommend Gear 360? That's a technical question. I don't know if you want to take that.
Yeah, my darlings, I am not a gear person at all. I stick with one camera and one lens. I think that's 102, 24 to 105 wide, and my R5. Before that, I had the Canon like 5D. And the only reason I changed to the R5 was because I became a Canon ambassador and they gave it to me. If not, I would be using the same camera. But unfortunately, I'm not a gear person. Once I find that something works, it just keeps working. But I would definitely say experiment, because once again, that's also the part of growing.
I'm really struck by how much technical knowledge you have about this, because for a self-taught person, I'm going to come to that question later. There's a question here about what year would you say your photographic career kicked off, or what year would you say you had a breakthrough? And then maybe you take that with the second one, which is most of your shots appear to be close shots of human beings. Is this deliberate? And you don't seem keen on environment. Is this deliberate as well?
Okay, my photography career kicked off, I would say 2018, which was shortly after I had left Liberia, and I just come back from my job in Bali. I mean, it just kicked off. I'll be honest with you guys, I've never had to pitch ever, because the jobs were just coming in, and then like basically all the way up to 2020, and then COVID happened, and I was like, I was just kind of getting started. But a few jobs here and there in 2017 when I was on staff with Liberia, but I'd gotten a few New York Times. But I would say it really kicked off in 2018, but I picked up my camera on my phone in 2014. Do my shots appear to be close shots of human beings? Actually, no. If you look at my profile, you'll find a huge array of different sort of images and not a lot of close-ups, actually, because I focus on environmental shots. If you see a lot of human beings, that's because I predominantly do human interest stories. I predominantly focus on stories that have human beings and lives in it. And the environmental shots you'll see have to do with the literal environment. And sometimes just general environmental shots within a human interest story that gives context to that particular story.
Yeah. Brilliant. Somebody's asking if the camera you use as a photographer matters.
Before I would say no. Actually, a huge part of me would still say no, just because of how I got started with using a BlackBerry, and then from a BlackBerry I graduated to iPhone 4, and then from iPhone 4 I graduated to the Canon Rebel one, or whatever the case may be. But I have heard some fantastic things about other cameras and just how they work with lighting and whatnot. But honestly, no, predominantly, I would say the kind of camera doesn't matter. What matters is the story. My second major story for New York Times, the images were grainy, the lighting was poor, and they still published it, and they were so excited because of the story and because of what was happening within those images, because of what I had photographed. People are visual people. It's not just about the technicalities of the sharpness and all this other stuff. It's like, what story, in this case, in photojournalism, are you photographing? What are you documenting? You can have the most technically perfect image, but the content of it might be very boring. So I would say it's mainly about your eye and approach that really amplifies you as a photographer in photojournalism. Might be quite different in, the commercial world. Oh, did I freeze? Or is Victor still here? Okay, I didn't freeze. Okay, I'll go ahead with, oh, there we go with Victor, okay.
Yes, I'm back here, and sorry, I don't know what happened. I lost my connection and it just got me kicked out.
Okay, we're moving on to the next question. I've answered that one.
Okay, beautiful. The question I wanted to take was about time and how you manage your time, because somebody was asking about how you manage to get things done very quickly, your pace. I don't know if you've taken that question.
Oh no, is that in the list? Just so I can be reading it as well.
Yes. So there's a question from Kwada, Goitse Kwada. You say you work fast. I struggle with completing my work in a timely manner. Yeah.
I think honestly for me, it was the way I was raised. Like the school I went to in Aba our motto was literally speed and efficiency. So we were taught how to read fast and read accurately. Like that was the motto of our school, speed and efficiency. So I'm a very fast reader. I'm a very, very, I just know how to process things, and people have different capabilities. So for example, the reason why I'm also self-taught is that I'm not good with numbers. I really struggle with numbers. That's why I'm not a tech or gear person. That's also why I stick with Canon, because I started off with Canon and it was just the camera that I became very familiar with. If you put another camera in my hand, I'll just be like, I don't understand these dials, these numbers, F1, stop, please, I can't. You understand? So everyone has their different working pace and different learning capabilities. I would just say that when on a job, I use every amount of my time, every bit of my time. Even when I come back to the hotel at the end or back to my house at the end, is I just open my computer, put all the images. But also when it comes to photographing, it has been a disadvantage sometimes, but very rarely, is I know when to stop taking a picture. So I'm not going to stand in front of the same person, maybe the same person, drawing something and photograph them 200 times. Yeah. I will photograph them maximum 15 to 20 times and know when I've gotten the shots. I don't. So when I get home, I have less images to go through. I know when to, or maybe I stop. I always tell people that the majority of it is 85% waiting, and the rest of it is clicking the camera. So I wait for moments versus standing there and photographing every single movement that someone is making, because you're giving yourself a lot of work. Your job as a photographer is to observe, because that's how you know what will make a good image. So I would say a lot of people struggle with narrowing their images because they have taken so many. So I would say pause and try and know when to anticipate moments versus trying to document every single second of a moment.
Yeah. Wow, that's very important. Thanks, Yagazie. There's a question here. When doing a photo documentary, what are the key issues to keep in mind, and what should you focus on when capturing images of people affected by specific issues, such as cancer, for example? Do you get people to pose?
I very, very rarely get people to pose. It's very, very rare. I never request anything of ill people, ever, ever. I also believe that the job of your job as a photographer, especially in documentary and photojournalism, once again, is to document those natural moments. I do think that, posing in the majority of, because it does happen, is not an honest depiction of an environment. Yeah. If a sick person cannot sit up, you photograph them lying down. You do not that's something that I'm very passionate about, is that I do not request anything of sick people. If I feel that they're being uncomfortable with my presence just by me staying 2 minutes longer, I leave and I tell my editor, no. So do not pose sick people, do not pose or make any requests from vulnerable people, depending on the energy. So they have been in situations where, if I've spent one of my Nat Geo stories, I was meant to photograph a family within their 1 bedroom, a family of 6. And that image, if you find it online, is actually posed within a sense where I was just like, oh, how do you guys normally look like when you guys are relaxing at home? And then, dad says, oh, we just lie on the bed and chill. I was like, oh, could I see that just so I can show an image, So we did that, and all of us were just talking. The children were playing around and climbing over their dad. The mom was with the baby, and that's still a natural moment versus telling people sit on this side. They just did their own thing, and I photographed a few moments. And whenever there's a request in those sort of scenarios, that's when I move especially fast, because sometimes 1 minute over 10 minutes, then people are uncomfortable because they're just like, I did it now. What's more? So I only pose within that context, which is like, can you just show me and then pretend as if I'm not here? And I would say I've had a lot of success in that because I try and make people as comfortable as possible. If they're not comfortable and I can see it, I immediately stop. And I think all of us have a good sense of when people are not comfortable when we have a camera
Absolutely.
in our hands. So focus on representing the issue as accurately as possible. If it's a situation with pollution, with illness, a lot of the times people are already uncomfortable in those naturally uncomfortable situations or environments. So it might not make for the most riveting of images sometimes, but it will make for the most truthful of images. And that should always be your priority.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yagazie. There are few questions here that look similar, so I'll just take them together. How do you find participants for your stories? People whose stories you want to talk to? And people whose stories you want to talk about. And there's a question on the books you could recommend to improve on storytelling.
Okay. Lennox, unfortunately, I don't have any books. I really don't. I wish I did, but I think when I started out in photography, because I was, transit a lot of the time and I didn't have a place to stay, I literally could not afford to buy. Not only could I not afford to buy photo books or anything like that, but I was moving around so much that I can't carry all these things with me. So I never invested. I know a lot of photographers that have fantastic photo books, and by the time I had stability, I honestly didn't see the need for it. I still love a good photo book, but I don't have any. And I think photo books are excellent, lessons within them in terms of storytelling and visual representation, but I just never got into that. In terms of how do I find participants, I never work by myself. In documentary and photojournalism, especially when you are you've been hired for a story, you work with a fixer. And that a fixer is usually someone that is local to a community or is familiar with the topic and whatnot. And they find the people. It is very rare for me to go into, if I'm interested in a particular community, it's very rare for me to go inside the community and start photographing. I find someone from that community first, and then I compensate them for their guidance to find people that fit into the storyline. So with all my stories, except for my independent work, I always work with a local fixer or someone that's more knowledgeable than me on the story. And that always leads to a better thing because you're being guided. For my independent work, it just so happens that I already have some sort of access where it's easy for me to go in. And a lot of the times they're just more creative ideas that don't really involve, working within certain communities.
Wow, great. There's a question on equipment. What's your take on mirrorless and DSLR? Does it really matter? And how do you deal with doubts around the ideas you come up with?
Okay, on equipment, I'm so sorry, my dear. I can't help you. I really can't. Once again, I use a Canon R5, and that's kind of what I stick with. Also because I'm a Canon ambassador. So I wish I could. No, you didn't hear anything. So unfortunately, I can't really answer that question in detail. But I talked about it a bit lighter before, where I really don't think it matters. Usually I would say go for the camera that's lighter, which is usually like a mirrorless, just easy to move, or something that's a little bit more discreet. How do you deal with doubts around the ideas you come up with? I just do it. Like, once again, is if I'm working independently, is I might have some doubts or insecurities about the work, but the work has to be completed first in order for me to, I can't be doubtful of whether I should embark on something. I have to embark on something and then see how it's going and then be like, oh, are you sure? But with the ideas that I come up with, I am putting in my own time some aspects of my own money into it. So there's really no plan B when I create my work. It has to do well. And if it doesn't do well, that's okay, because time will tell. Like I said, I've created work that no one cared about for years. And then 5 years later, someone is nominating me for an award for it. There are times where I'm just like, did I really spend all this time at sea for what? But I say once again, do the work that you're interested in, and the rest will always follow. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Thanks, Yagazie. This next question is about your values and how you weigh that against the paychecks. But I mean, I've got a similar question in mind. When I saw this question, it made me remember something. I had a conversation sometime with some players in the artificial intelligence space. And one of the things that they said was the deficit of the right type of images. And even outside of the artificial intelligence space, in general, you find in image banks, you find deficit of the right types of images that represent Africa and the true storytelling in Africa that, showcases progressive and nuance, on the continent. And you see stereotypical stuff all the time. And I keep asking myself, who is to blame for this? Are the photographers compromising? Are the photographers who are providing the content? Are they not doing enough, or do they not know well enough? For example, when you go to the AI space, somebody say you type in some prompts and you can't find images of a Black doctor treating white patients, or even as flimsy as, a Black coach coaching a football team with white players, or a Black teacher teaching white students, all those types of things. We hear this all the time. And I keep wondering, the people who provide this content, are we compromising, or do we just not know how impactful the kind of content we put out there is? And that was what this question brought to mind. This question about being offered a job with a sizable paycheck that goes against your values. So what do you have to say on this?
Honestly, with the AI stuff, I don't know how it works, like quite transparently. I just know that it's very bad for the environment. And from my understanding, it's also part of like programming, because I tried the AI thing on WhatsApp where I was just like, show me a white person robbing a store, because it was something that was happening on Twitter. And they couldn't show a white person, but then and then I said, show me a Black person, and they did it easily. And I said, okay, you're discriminating. And they're like, oh, we didn't mean to. We'll do it. We'll show you a white person. Show me a white person. Do it. And then I asked why. And the program was like, it seems that I have been programmed this way.
Wow.
So I think these images of, Black professionals and whatnot, they exist. But I'm just going to assume that, the AI people, are very much like they're the ones who are, creating a certain program for this AI to follow, where they're like, we're obviously not going to put white people in vulnerable or dangerous, or
situations
environment, but we can do it because the creators have their own racist values, Now, in terms of negative images that exist out there that, African photographers have created, that fit into some sort of stereotype that AI might feed upon, I would like to chalk it up to ignorance, because if you don't have, and not the bad type of ignorance, but if you don't have the lesson or the exposure of how to work within Africa as an African photographer, you're most likely going to look at people who are successful, and some of them might be Western photographers, and see what they're doing. And I'll definitely say a lot of them are not great examples. So you might want to emulate that, especially when you look at the greats in the Western world who created a lot of damaging images around people of color. But unfortunately, there also, I hate to say this because I have encountered it, there are some people that genuinely do not care. They want to get their shots. I've seen, photographers jump in front of vulnerable people and take their picture without any conversation of consent or anything like that, because they just want to get that shot and make that impression. So all I can say is, for everybody, is like, lead with integrity first. Sometimes you have to let a moment pass for the greater good, so that you're not making someone, uncomfortable or anything like that.
Yeah.
Have I ever been offered a job with a sizable paycheck? No, I haven't. It's against my value. I think what happens most often is after, especially in my younger years, is after I've worked with an organization, then I'm like, oh, you guys aren't that great. So for example, I've worked with the Gates Foundation before, and it wasn't until like a few years later around this whole, birth control conversation in Africa, I was just like, these people are up to something here. So I wouldn't work with them again in that regard. Yeah.
Wow, this is really powerful. Thank you so much, Yagazie. I think we have just a few more minutes to the end of this fireside chat, and I wish we could take as many questions because we still have a few more questions that we've not touched. I also have questions of my own I wanted to ask you, but I don't want to be selfish. I know that people will come from my head at the end of this session. So Victor, you monopolized it. You asked all your questions and you didn't take ours. So let's see how many more we can take very quickly, and then we can call it a day because I'm sure you also need to catch your breath, drink some water, and get some relief. There's a question here about if you'd be keen to give more workshops or create a collective for Black female journalists to keep going with the community support.
I would love that, but honestly, it's a matter of time.
Do you have stuff you do right now? Do you do any of these types of outreaches right now?
I don't, because like I was saying, it's a matter of time and funding. I really do not like working for free. I would rather do something on my own time. Like I let's be honest, the work I do is not completely altruistic. I also do it for myself and for my survival. And I have dependents. I have 3 family members that I fully take care of. So in terms of giving my time for free, it's actually a massive ask, a massive sacrifice on my end, because I could be taking other jobs. I could be doing my own independent, projects that would pay off. I love to share. I love to support other photographers, but if I could find, some sort of funding or organization to work with that could benefit younger photographers, but also mutually benefits me as well, then I would love to do that.
Thank you, Yagazie. Yagazie, these 3 questions I don't want to gloss over, and I think it's very important. Somebody's asking about where to start, right? They want to start documentary, but they want to know how to start. Somebody's also asking a similar question, but in terms of what's the minimal resource that is required to start, right? So it's all about starting. What do you think is the barest minimum that they should possess to start?
Start in your own backyard. A lot of people think that you have to, go to some, hardcore community or whatnot. There is value in every individual story. So you could even start off with your phone or borrowing from people, because I have borrowed cameras before, to just photograph maybe the day in the life of your mother and what that looks like, photographing the soft moments of, your mother tired or your mother angry or whatever the case may be. But a lot of the times, really great stories are in your own backyard or in your own community. So don't try and look at the big stories that people are doing in terms of social issues and climate crisis. There's value in all these stories. There are values in all these stories, So I would say focus at home, especially if, people are restricted in terms of movement and travel. Look behind you, see what's behind you, see what's in front of you, and start from there.
And put it out where? Where do they put it out? Where should they put it? Social media.
Social media. Put it on social media. Like, we're talking about it. It doesn't ignore the likes, ignore the engagements. If you have no engagements, if you have huge engagement, put out your work first. You're doing it for yourself, and you're also doing it for the people that are sharing your story with you. You're not doing it for the likes. You're not doing it for the engagement. You want people to see these stories, but just put it out there.
Yeah. I mean, there's one last question, and I feel like I'll feel so terrible if I don't take this question, and it ties into something I said earlier. You taught yourself all of this, and there seems to be a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of mechanics around, photography. It's quite technical. And I want to know how you navigated, very, very briefly, how you navigated this, acquiring this knowledge, right? And what advice you have for people out there who want to follow the same route.
Like technical, as in like actually technical, like how the camera works or what?
Yeah,
Or
how the camera, how the camera works, how to infuse your storytelling, how to manipulate the camera for the shots and get the best kind of shots and all of those types of things. It sounds quite technical. You can hear some of the questions talking about the camera specifications and all of that.
yeah.
These are things you have navigated this path. You've jumped over these hoops. How did you do that? You know, from somebody who learned on her own, you taught yourself. How did you
Okay,
get all
so
that
quite
knowledge?
completely self-taught. Like I said, I mean, I would put it lightly in terms of having a learning disability when it comes to numbers and understanding sequences and whatnot. Even when it comes to filing and numbering my work, that's probably the slowest I will ever move in photography. But the way I learned with my camera is, I would say it's quite unique, and it's actually what got me my Canon ambassadorship. Is I was transparent with them and I told them, as a self-taught photographer and someone who also struggles with numbers, so to even learn the basics of how photography works was very difficult for me because it is about numbers. Was that I actually learned through muscle memory and a lot of trial and error. So and that's why when I mentioned earlier that what do you call it, I'm used to a Canon and I'll always use a Canon, is because I know the feel of it and I literally know what movements get me what. If I were
Yeah.
to explain to you the specifics, I honestly cannot. I really
Yeah.
can't. It was a lot of trial and error, and a lot of the times it's memory, it's muscle memory. I know because I always shoot on manual. It's like I know when I go out, I literally know how many clicks in a certain sort of lighting. I'm not looking at the numbers. I'm feeling it, and that's basically how I taught myself for years.
Wow.
So some
Wow.
people are really, really, really good with the numbers, which is why I said that, one of my first stories with National Geographic, the lighting was bad. It was very grainy. I was, that was probably my first like major story to work on extensively. I was nervous. I wasn't too familiar with the camera and whatnot. But once again, it was really the angles that I was going for, that helped me. So I really wish I could help you with specifics of technicalities. But quite honestly, that's literally not my forte. I just know
Yeah.
stories and I just know people. And like I said, 85% of my work is not the camera.
Mm. Wow, Yagazie, I'm afraid, audience, this is how much we can take. It's overtime already. I think we have 3 minutes or 4 minutes overtime already. It's amazing how time flies when you're having fun. I've had a lot of fun. I've learned a lot. I have tons of questions I wanted to ask you, Yagazie, and you know this, but I've not even scratched them.
Could we
And
spare, is it possible to spare 10 minutes just to go over, or
okay,
is there time?
it's well, I mean, it's really up to you. If you have another 10 minutes, that will be something that most people
I
will be
didn't
grateful
expect
for.
this number of questions, so I will do 10 minutes and I'll answer them very short. I won't do any stories.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
The last question that and thank you so much, Yagazie, for this. You're very generous. The last question we stopped on was about how do you establish connections with reliable fixers when working on a news story or a story new environment?
A lot of the times with platforms like New York Times, which was one of my predominant clients, is the journalist, you are paired with a journalist and a fixer, the journalist has already found a fixer. So a lot of the times there's already someone in place or someone recommended because you're not actually the person writing the story. So just know that a lot of the times there will be a journalist, a fixer that is already in contact with the journalist that you can work with. And other times it's about asking within the photography network if you're working independently. If I'm going to Kano, I'll hit up one of my photography friends that I know has worked in Kano and say, do you know anybody I can work with? So that's also an aspect of networking.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, there's a question here on access, and I know you touched on this earlier, how to get brands to pick up works and publish works, and some people are just stuck at that stage. Do you have any word to say to them on how to just access and break through the barriers?
I would say pitch. even though I'm speaking as someone who has not pitched before, I've pitched a few stories, but then they never went through because I didn't have time, and I started doing another story with that same publication, and then it kind of fizzled out. But I would say pitch. There are lots of, if you check online, just I mean, Google really is your best friend sometimes, is look at how to build a strong pitch. And sometimes it's really just a small 3-paragraph thing where you hit the editor saying, this is the story I'm interested in. This is the access I have. They want to know how you already have access to it, because they want to know how fast you can work on the story. So I would say pitch and keep putting yourself out there. I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead dog with this, but it really is about consistency and creating the work that you want to do, or something that looks like the work with the brand that you want to work with.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've skipped a few questions, but I feel like you've touched on some of them.
Okay.
There's a question here about finances, financial management. As a freelancer, what advice would you give to apportion one's finances so that one doesn't starve? I'm spending a lot of money to create content, and I'm looking for how to better balance it. I know you talked about this in one of your stories, how you have some funds and you can actually book your flight ticket yourself and get reimbursed.
Yeah.
All of those types of things. What do you say to this person?
I mean, my dear, honestly, I don't know what you're spending your money on to create content. It just depends on like the scale. I haven't really necessarily have to spend a lot of money on independent stories, just because unless I am working with models, where I have to pay them and compensate them, I don't really spend my money on anything outside of transport or food, because in my world, especially as a photojournalist, I'm working with people who want to share their stories. If you start paying people for their stories, there's a little bit of like integrity danger there, where people might embellish their stories a little bit more just to ginger you because you're paying them. They want to give you a good performance and whatnot. So for me personally, I tend to work with people for free who genuinely want to share their stories, and you're transparent with them and you're saying like, yeah, I want to share it to expand my portfolio or whatever the case may be. It might end up on this, like on social media or whatever the case may be. But I would say work with people who genuinely want to create. If you're creating content, I don't know the sort of content you're creating, try and do collaborations with like-minded people, where you don't have to spend that much money on resources, or you guys can share your resources together.
Okay, thank you so much. Useful advice. There's a question here about what you prioritize when crafting a compelling visual story in your photography.
Always the people first. And sometimes that, I mean, it's just literally what it is the people first. And sometimes that doesn't cross over. Sometimes I cannot get a compelling visual story because of the person that I want to photograph. But I would say, when creating a visual story is just honestly, it'll get you so far. Have genuine interest in the people, have genuine care, like share drinks with them, even though there's some fishy things about, not eating with people, but share drinks with them, share food with them, be comfortable in their home. Don't lead goal oriented first, where you're like, oh, this again. More than 80% of your work should be talking and connecting with people. The least amount of work I spend is taking that picture, so be people forward all the time and be very intentional and sincere about it, because people can tell.
Yeah. I mean, thank you so much. There's a question here about somebody requesting to know if they should request a contract from a big publisher before they sign. And I don't think I should bother you with that question. I think the answer should be a yes.
Yeah.
Always request for that contract. And if they don't bring it up, you bring it up as a creative.
Yeah, follow up, send a reminder email saying, hey, I am just following up on the contract, as I need to be able to review and sign it before beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. How do you handle composition on the spot, seeing how important it is in storytelling? I'm not sure I understand that. How do you handle composition on the spot?
First and foremost.
Hello, Yagazie?
Oh, sorry, that was me. I thought it was even you.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Okay, bye. Yeah.
Okay, maybe our connection is telling us it's time to round up. How do you handle composition on the spot? Have you taken that question?
Okay, no. How do I handle composition of the what?
On the spot, seeing how important it is in storytelling. I guess that was a technical question that had to do with how you take your shots and all that. I'm not sure I understand fully.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Okay.
Where's the question? Okay. Okay, how do you
It's
handle composition on the spot?
an anonymous person.
I
Yeah.
I don't understand what composition means. Oh. Sorry.
Okay. Maybe they're referring to how you compose yourself, and I don't know.
Or like the framing of the image, perhaps, or
Maybe.
um, yeah, okay, framing. Yeah, I would. I mean, for me, I don't know. It's natural. So I try and give like different options for my editor, even though my go-to usually is like I always go down low. I like to create layers. I usually have a 3-point system. So
Yeah.
something here, a person here, something else here. I like to create a little triangle, rectangle situation in a lot. If you look at a lot of my images, you will definitely see a few, the rule of third in them a lot. That just makes for more interesting images, in my opinion.
Wow. That's interesting. There's a question here, and I think we're getting to the end of this, perhaps one or two more, and then we can call it a day. Can you share tips for working with models and capturing candid emotions?
It's very hard to capture candid emotions with models, except when they're performing these emotions. I would just say try and make, I tend to dance, I tend to do more than the models sometimes, which is, get on the set with them, jump around if needed to jump around. I'm saying like, this is what I need you guys to do and just keep going. And with models, you just need to keep the energy up, to keep them excited, to make them feel comfortable. Yeah, and then they end up having, especially if it's a fun type of shoot, then they end up having fun. In terms of capturing candid emotions in serious shoots, I don't think it's possible because they're posing and they're serving face as they should, and you should definitely be photographing that.
Mm, beautiful. There's a question here about publishing, and I don't know if the person heard you clearly, uh,
Mm,
because I feel like you touched on this a little in your presentation. My question is, you said we shouldn't rush into getting published, but
mm.
there are so many opportunities where they require you to share where your images have been published. How do I go
Mm.
about this, given that my work is mostly consumed on social media and I have not been published before?
I would say that that's fair. Once again, have your websites. I'm not sure what sort of opportunities where they're saying where have you been published, but you can say that I've self-published on my website.
Okay.
Please take a look at it. I have not yet gotten the opportunity to work with X, Y, and Z publications, if that is the publication in particular that you're applying to or engaging with. But once again, your images always lead first. Editors, when they're really looking for photographers, they will go to your website. I had to start from somewhere without being published, and that's because
Yeah.
once again, editors went to my website and saw the sort of work I was creating and saw that it fit into their visual needs, and sometimes it fits, sometimes it doesn't.
Beautiful. Have you tried green photography and what are the opportunities in this space?
By green photography, if you mean like the sort of like environmental, please, have I
Hello,
disconnected?
Yagazie.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yes, I was asking a
Okay.
question about green photography, and I think that should be the last.
Yeah, I think for I'm not sure. I'm guessing green photography means more about like the environmentally conscious sort of photography. Correct me, guys, because that's the first time I'm hearing that term. I can only think that it means the environment. Um, can anybody correct me on that? If not, we can quickly move on to the next question because I'm not too sure what green photography is.
Question three, where did you get inspiration from? How do you think photographs?
Oh, sorry. I guess the internet is really failing on my end. Sorry, guys. Can you ask the question again? Okay. So can people still hear me, or is this Victor? I can't tell whose end is. Okay, great. I will go to the next question. What do you think of photographs side by side with text and captions? I would say do that, especially if it's on your website. Where do I get my inspiration from? Nostalgia. I still focus on things that remind me of growing up in Aba. When do you start thinking of the final product? The final product, I'm sorry, I never look at images or stories as a final product. It's really a matter of like, when does a story end? And a lot of the times, obviously, assignments have their own story end to it. Personal work also has its own story end, but I just don't look at bodies of work as products to say. I don't know what, I'm not too sure what that question means in terms of a final product. Yeah, and then readily available mentorship things, I answered that already. Mentorship programs, answered that.
Yeah.
Security and whatnot, a lot of the times I'm not, once again, I'm traveling with a fixer. I'm traveling with someone who's aware of the environment. Sometimes a local leader might already have gotten the heads up. We never go into an environment without preparation. If I'm working with institutions like National Geographic and New York Times, you are, keyed in with a security team in the States or on ground with, in terms of security information, where if there is an issue, you will get a heads up like, oh, there's an attack over there, but that is actually very, very, very rare. How do I manage to have my photographs published in media outlets? I've been approached. They approach me because they have seen my work online on my websites. And I think I've answered most of the other questions. I think, okay, one last question
Yeah.
is as a photojournalist, do you think you have the freedom to explore other fields of photography in a way that doesn't confuse people who follow your usual work? Don't bear that in mind. If you look at my social media, I post a variety of different things. And once again, what leads my work is my interest. I'm not doing the work I do for people, for an audience necessarily to consume in that regard when it comes to like people following my work. I would want, in terms of longevity, please branch out, please experiment. Don't feel limited to one thing. Even if you think that it confuses people who are following you for one other thing, they will get used to what you put out. So don't feel limited whatsoever in terms of exploring other fields of photography. Your platform is your platform to put your interests on. So just do that. And oh, please, sorry, last question. Never photograph children without permission of their parents. I think that's a very basic one. Get consent. Do not photograph anybody without permission. Street photography is a little bit when you are on a public street, but do not photograph children without their consent. Do not photograph adults that you are making eye contact with without their consent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Yagazie. I think we really must call it a day at this point. Yagazie, are you still there?
Yes, I am. I am. Okay. I think my internet is still good, so I think it's Victor's side. Yeah. Okay, it's Victor. Well, thank you everyone for. Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Sorry, I think my to play tricks on me. But I mean, thank you so much. I was just saying thank you, Yagazie. You've been extremely generous. You've filled out of time. You have gone much and much beyond what we had planned. And I really appreciate you for this. And I think everyone would also be grateful to you for this. I've learned a lot, and I believe a lot has been learned by the audience as well. This is what we do for the ANF Academy sessions. We bring you tips, we bring you skills, we bring you expertise that enables you get more proficient with your storytelling and also enables you become more viable as a business, because it's in our interest that you survive as a sustainable business to continue to push out the kind of stories that shift narratives and changes perception Africa and addresses the stereotypes and the biases against the continent. And so we're very grateful to you for taking the time, and we're very grateful to our guest, Yagazie Emezi. We will continue to root for you. We wish you all the best, and we know that you make Africa proud. Please, before you sign out, there's this question that has been popped up on the screen again. For those of you who were not able to take the question, the question is on the screen again. So please do provide answers to these questions. It helps us improve, the quality of subsequent sessions on our ANF Academy. Subsequent offers will get better and continue to get better with the feedback that you give to us. So thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Keep following us. We'll continue to bring this to you next year in a much more forceful and powerful way. We have a lot more topics, interesting conversations lined up for you all next year. So please make it a date with us again, same time next year, and we'll continue to go on this journey together. Yagazie, I can't say thank you enough. We're very, very grateful to you.
Thank you for your questions, and until next time, thank you all.
Absolutely. Thanks, and wish you all the best.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.